I think it goes to community, or all comes back to community. So at the outset of this project, we could not have anticipated who would want to write, of course, it's a difficult political climate, it has been for years, and who, especially graduate student parents, would want to publish on their experience, which might be unlike, a mainstream or more typical, there's no typical, but more typical graduate student experience from their lived perspective.
Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me two brilliant minds reshaping how writing, care, and learning happen in academia. Dr. Jackie Hoermann-Elliott and Dr. Jenna Morton-Aiken. Jackie is an associate professor of English at Texas Women's University and a leading voice in embodied learning. Her teaching blends writing with movement, mindfulness, and well-being, and her books, including Running, Thinking, Writing, and Parenting While PhDing, shine a light on how academia can better serve students, student parents, and underrepresented learners. Jenna Morton-Aiken is a teacher, scholar, and writing program leader at Brown University's Sheridan Center, and she also runs the Undergraduate Writing Fellows program at Brown. With a PhD in English and a background in creative writing, she supports faculty and grad students across disciplines through pedagogical consulting, research, and mentorship. Jenna is also the editor of Parenting While PhDing, that came out in 2025, and a contributor to award-winning work on scientific communication and care work in academia. Together, Jackie and Jenna bring a refreshing and deeply human perspective to what it means to teach, write, and be a parent in higher ed today. Jackie, thank you so much for being here. This is a super important subject that I don't see covered very often. I've had some interviews on Beyond the Thesis that have covered and have broached the subject of becoming and being a parent while being in graduate school. But from what I see, they're few and far between. So again, just this, I just want to reiterate how grateful I am that you could take some time to be here today and share this with the Papa PhD audience.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're delighted to be here and to get more airtime on this topic, which is really incredibly important. And we talk all about why in the book. But we know in the US and abroad, student parents are on the rise, post-secondary level, graduate level, more and more. And like you said, I'm an associate professor of English at Texas Women's University. I work with our Family Matters initiatives and different student parent groups on campus and faculty parent groups as well. And it's really interesting to me to see how the needs have changed from even the time when I was in graduate school and I was a parent myself. And I don't know if you see that at your institution as well, Jenna, but certainly what we're seeing is a new kind of need. And there wasn't as much literature as we hoped for around this topic and that kind of support.
Mm-hmm. So, Jenna, do you have anything to add from your side, from what you see around you in your institution?
I would agree with Jackie. I'm at Brown University now, and so there certainly is. It's still kind of conversations in hallways that happen. People talking to each other kind of very informally. And there is still a sense of, you shouldn't do that in graduate school. Don't do that in graduate school. And it's something that's quite personal. Jackie and I was pregnant when I was in graduate school. I actually started my PhD when I was 7 months pregnant. And I was that person trying to ask questions, trying to navigate what was going on. So I had my first daughter in my first year and my second daughter in my third year. And in that time, there were more conversations happening on campus, but we didn't see more of the literature. And so when Jackie and I met later, we decided this was something we needed to contribute to because it was so important.
Mm-hmm. So, it is important, and I'm just remembering conversations I've had on the podcast. For example, someone who, during her postdoc, had to advocate with her colleagues to get more maternal leave, and the thing that was shocking, and of course, being a parent in graduate school is not just the maternal leave, but she said that the turning point was when they understood that postdocs were getting less time to be with their newborn than pups by law, were mandated to stay with their mom before being separated. And when she told me that, it was really a shock. And this was a few years ago. I hope things have changed, but well, I come from the European context, although now I'm in Montreal, and Canada is also different. But when I heard that, I was in shock. It was really difficult to hear. But the good thing is that with her colleagues, they were able, based on that information and that gruesome comparison, they were able to make things move a little bit. But I think that's just a very small. What they got was still a very small change. But anyway, that's why we are here still in 2026 talking about this. That's why I'm super happy that you actually worked on a book about this specifically. But before maybe we get into the thick of it, I introduced you very quickly to our listeners. And maybe, Jenna, we were talking right now. Can you just add a couple more details to the puzzle, the mosaic of who you are, personally, but your relationship with what you do at university and how you went all the way to the PhD. If you want to spare a couple of minutes, introducing yourself a little bit more.
Sure. So I have quite a non-traditional path into academia. I have always loved writing. I've always thought of myself as a writer, but I thought I had to get a real job. And so kind of fought against that instinct to work in writing. I didn't know at the time that rhetoric and composition was a field and was something I could pursue. So I was actually an undergraduate poli-sci major. I did kind of my creative writing on the side, but that wasn't officially what I did. I went and taught English in Japan for a year after university. It's where I met my husband, who is from England. And so then I went back and worked in business because that's, kind of what I thought I was supposed to do. And it was interesting. I learned a lot of things. It was very challenging. It didn't really make me happy. It didn't make me feel like I was fulfilled or contributing to something larger. So after working for a few years, I was in London at the time. I did my master's there in creative writing, went back to business. And then when my husband and I were living in London, we decided to move back to the States. And I realized I needed something different. I needed a change. And so I started teaching as an adjunct at the university. My first day of class, I realized this is what I want to do. I was 30 years old. We knew we wanted a family. And so we decided we'd do all the things at once. So I put in for a PhD. We thought about where we would move when I got in and started trying for a baby. And then all of those things landed. So the fall of 2012, we bought a house. We moved to a new school, new state. I started my PhD program. And that November, I gave birth to our first daughter.
Okay. Super, super interesting. And Jackie, on your side.
Yes. So it's interesting because I think I took a pretty traditional path through academia, but not through motherhood. So I always thought it was incredible. Jenna, just in year 1 and year 3, she had her kids in grad school. I became a mother, or we talk a little bit in the book about matrescence and the becoming of a mother or a parent. We try to be really inclusive in our terminology in the book because there's real biological data to show that the experience of becoming a parent isn't one that can be owned or experienced just by a biological parent. Their adoptive parents, their step parents, and so on. So I became a step parent first. My stepdaughter to this day she's a teen now, and I had her first. And so when I met my husband, when I was working on my PhD at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, I met my husband. He had a 3-year-old, and that just totally changed everything for me. And about a year and a half, 2 years later, we were engaged. We were getting married. And not long after we got married, we're pregnant. And so I had my first son. I have 3 biological sons now. I had 2 on the tenure track. My first son was a wild ride because I had him while I was dissertating. And he was a newborn when I was on the job market and had all kind of experiences without getting TMI, too much information, but it's really difficult to navigate the job market while you are a recently postpartum parent. And there's a lot of information on that in the book, on lactation and what that looks like. And that was very much my lived experience. The other but empowering story I like to tell sometimes is that I was trying to decide, do I go on the job market this year and we don't try for a kid? But there's some advantages to having that flexible schedule in graduate school when you want to start trying for kids. And I remember sitting in my dissertation director's office, and I told her, I want to be done in 4 years. I can do this. I can crank out this dissertation. And she looked at me real hard. She gave me a long, hard look, and she said, I think you should take a 5th year. I think you'll be better prepared for the market. And it was in that moment that I decided I'm going to have a baby, and she also had a baby in graduate school and advised many of us against doing that. So I kind of went against advice, but I also think that's one of the strong themes in this collection that we're so proud of is it's all about advice narratives. Every chapter is an advice narrative, and you take the advice that serves you. And so I think that's really important and worth considering.
Of course. Super interesting. Now, so you collaborated on this book. It came out recently. And I like the way the cover is graphically has been created, because I don't know, you said parent, you talked about inclusivity, and when you first look at it, you see just parent PhD, and then there's the ing that comes after. I really like anyway, visually, and it evokes something for me in that identity, but then also the lived experience of going through that experience just on the cover. But the question, and now that we know both your paths and how they differ, the question is, how did you meet, and how did you embark on this collaboration on this subject? How did that happen? What's the origin story?
So I love this story because Jackie and I, to this day, have actually never met in person. I live in Rhode Island. She lives in Texas. And we have done the entire book. Our entire friendship has been over Zoom and text messages and email. And this book actually came out of a virtual session. We're both part of a mothers group in our professional organization. And it was I think it was April of 2021, and everybody was still really in the mess of COVID. But we were far enough into it yet that we were really starting to hit the barriers and the conversations about being parents at home, being mothers at home, and being academic mothers. So everyone showed up to this conversation exhausted, not quite able to be there. Jackie actually took it from her car in her driveway so her kids wouldn't see her, so she could be on her own. And somebody said, we need a book about this. We're all so tired, and we need to do something that kind of makes this all visible and brings it into academia in a way that academia will recognize and will value. And I don't remember which of us volunteered first, but it was something along the lines of, I don't have any time, so I will help do this book. And then, the other one of us said, I also do not have any time. I will also help with this book. And so then we worked on Zoom, with kids in the background and everything else, and put together the call for proposals. And we were really intentional about the fact that we were trying to include a wide range of experiences, because being, everyone's experience is different. And so we wanted to get as many of those could. And as Jackie said, it's narratives. And the idea is not do it this way. It is, this was my experience. I'm sharing out so you can take from it ideas, suggestions, maybe, figure out what you don't want to do, or just really kind of piece through. We also worked really hard to make sure they're short narratives. They're about 3,000 words, and some of them dive into the scholarship. Many of them don't. We really wanted them to be accessible stories, because if it's a parent picking it up, if it's someone who's thinking about being a parent, or if it's an administrator who's working with graduate student parents, we wanted them to be able to pick it up, get something valuable, and then go on with everything else. And so that's really what drove it. And our contributors were amazing. We worked with them again over Zoom. Everything was virtual. And when we delivered the manuscript, we were really proud of all the different stories that we were able to represent.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, from your side of things, did you have anything to add to the origin story?
No, the process took longer than expected because we received many, many more submissions than
Okay.
we bargained for. So that was really, but we had this huge showing from across the disciplines, and that was really exciting to see, and the response has been wonderful. I think we're happy to fill a void that existed for so long because so many books, are mama PhD, professor mommy, and again, they're not the most inclusive, and they really cater to a traditional faculty member on the tenure track.
Excellent.
And that's
Now,
not what's
yeah. That's not very inclusive. There's a lot of people who are going through grad school are not going to go into the tenure track, and those people also need these narratives and this inspiration, and especially because and you mentioned it in passing, Jackie, and young people in graduate school who are considering becoming parents, and if or becoming pregnant. When is the right moment? Should I wait or shouldn't I? I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance out there. And you said it, like your thesis director had done it, but she was recommending you not to do it. So, and this is very representative of the landscape out there, depending on. And I remember I was in undergrad, and we had great, the group dynamic was really good. I was working at a lab with a professor, and I remember, and this was like years ago, and he was fully telling young, in the cases I remember, young women asking him for advice, and his advice was, no, do it during your PhD. And I don't remember exactly what was his rationale to recommend it, but I think basically it was around, this is the moment where you are building things, and once you're done, you'll need to either go into a professional job outside academia or going to the tenure track, which is very demanding. So do it before. Anyway, I'm just telling you of an example I know. But then there's other people who are going to say, no, go through your PhD as fast as you can, and then you'll figure it out. But just from both your stories and what you said about your supervisor, you see that if you just, ask around, you may have very different recommendations. So that there's not one prescription, and that's why I think the narrative approach that you have in the book is perfect, because different people will resonate with different stories and will pick different elements for their path based on their own, makeup, background, life, situation, etc., etc. Now, did you or have you had this experience of feeling this cognitive dissonance in people you talk with who are going through these decisions, and have you had conversations with people who are in a position like thesis supervisors who are on the different teams? Let's say, okay, do it during the PhD, or team, no, do it after. And
very
either of
regularly.
you can answer.
Yeah, no, this is something that came up, and I think I mentioned this in the book a little bit, is because I was pregnant while a full-time faculty member, I would have graduate students kind of slink into my office and kind of shut the door and just leave it open a crack and then sit down in my chair. And that they're about to drop some truth bomb or something very private when that happens. And pretty regularly for several years, when I was very visibly pregnant, students would ask me, you had a kid in graduate school, what happened? How did you do that? Can I do that? What happens if I do that? Do I lose my assistant? All these questions. And I still to this day, I advise and direct dissertations at TWU, Texas Women's University. And I get asked this question very regularly. We just had a panel on it last semester, of students wondering what their options are, because they don't always have faculty members that they don't know sometimes if their directors or their advisors have children. do or don't. And they don't know who to turn to. They don't know, do I get any kind of leave? And I will say, even at TW, we have leave mechanisms in place, but we don't have like a traditional parental leave. Do I get leave? Who will cover my classes? What happens if I have, because you can't control, obviously, when you're going to have a child. Sometimes it just happens, or our timelines shift, and that doesn't necessarily neatly align with dissertation defense date, our exams. But I will say, so I get asked that question quite regularly. I'm advising several graduate student parents this semester, and I'm so proud of them. We celebrate families at TW. We do something called family graduation. I think more universities are doing that now. And I love that because we really try to bring kids into the fold. I invite kids into my classes, and I try to really normalize caregiving in academia. But yes, that's something that comes up very regularly in my work.
Jenna, do you have ideas on this?
Yeah, I had a kind of a wide range of conversations about it. So I was the first person apparently to have a baby when I started my PhD program. And so, no one quite knew what to do with me. And I also talk about this in the book a little bit, that everyone had great intentions. They didn't necessarily have the information in order to advise me as they might have otherwise. For example, when I had my second daughter, it was in April, and she was born April 15th, so I knew I wouldn't make it through the end of the semester. And I went to my director of graduate studies, who was a wonderful person, who said, okay, and obviously you will be paid for your time on leave. And fortunately, we had a graduate student union, and I already talked to their representative. And so I knew that I did. But to some extent, especially, you're a graduate student, you're aware of the power dynamics. And even with a very supportive, responsive director of graduate studies, I was still very nervous to speak up and say, actually, I think I get leave and all these other things. And she had no idea. So she went then and looked for it. And so there were people in the program who had babies after I did. And it meant that had already happened. I had another conversation, though. A graduate student came to speak with me specifically because her advisor said, actually, to the students in her lab, it was a STEM program, do not get pregnant while you're in my lab. Like, do not. You clearly aren't serious. I don't know if she said you weren't serious, but that was the implication. But she actually said, don't get pregnant. And so this graduate student had heard about me and came and was like, so what do I do? And it was really kind of this, backroom conversation. It's like, okay, well, like, you can still do it. This is how. So at Brown, I supervise graduate students. They work in spaces, and I consult with them in occasionally, but it tends to be one-on-one, and they don't necessarily know that I'm a parent. So I really actually, which is the opposite of what I did initially when I had kids. I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a professional, in the space. And so I really separated my mothering life from my professional life. And then once we got into COVID and everything else, I realized not only wasn't that working for me because it was too much of a divide, but also all these other folks were going through their own difficult situations. And so talking about my challenges made everything kind of more accessible. They found their own ways. So now I talk about it regularly, so they get to see that model. So I still have students come in and, ask about those conversations. And I think it's really important because a lot of people just don't know what to do. And that's both on the student side and the administrator side. And so kind of normalizing the conversation is, again, part of what we're looking to do here.
That's amazing. And now a question for me that arises immediately is, what brings, and I understand, you made a point, Jenna, that I was thinking of, and you just made it through the story you told, which is STEM. I imagine there's kind of a difference between STEM, which is where I was. I did my PhD in cell biology, where there's this whole, high pressure to publish publish a lot in high impact journals, and especially if you choose for your PhD an institution that's that's kind of a very prestigious one, and there will be pressure to be at lab all the time, vacations, etc., weekends. And I imagine, but I haven't had this conversation myself, but there will also, like you said, be the pressure of don't get pregnant while you're in my program. From the conversations you've had, there's two sides to this, and I'm thinking of the person wanting to become a parent. One side is, what's the motivation, or what's your interpretation of the motivation for a professor to ask that of an adult, student, graduate student, but an adult that has a life project. What do you think is bringing people to ask that of their graduate students? And then how is it that we can deal once that statement comes? Or sometimes it can be nonverbal. It just can be, you feel that it's you're walking on eggshells. And then if you for any reason, if you have difficulty just being assertive or advocating for yourself against a higher hierarchical person, how do you deal with that to still be able to be true to your life projects and your values, etc.?
So I would say that's a real theme throughout almost all of the chapters, actually, even if we take the STEM component out, in part because it seems like the machine of academia has just simply intensified in the last, handful of years. And so even folks who don't need to be in the lab, they're still having that pressure to put the hours in to kind of show up. And so that really comes up, that theme of kind of how do we speak up? How do we navigate? When is it safe to speak up? Because sometimes it simply isn't safe. So we had some folks who talk in the book about hiding pregnancies. One of the other things there were two other chapters. One is about she was a STEM graduate student. She wanted a baby. She had trouble getting pregnant. She was so excited. She was working at the lab with chemicals. And so then what was she supposed to do? And she didn't want to be perceived as weak or not committed. And so she pushed through, and looking back now, realizes the price she paid and how much she wishes she could have spoken up more at the time. We also have a medical student who talks about being pregnant and what she does with her rotations, because she wants to be pregnant and she, all of that. And then she gets into, and she realizes the irony of that she's in a medical environment where the idea is to care for patients, but because she's part of the system, she has to figure out how to navigate that. So that's incredibly difficult. And again, nobody has a kind of a magic solution. Part of it really seems to be figuring out who are the safe people, kind of, talking through things and figuring out where can you do things. The interesting part for me is that graduate student parents are incredibly committed and focused. We have to get it done. You cannot negotiate with a baby who needs to be fed. You cannot negotiate with daycare. If you don't have daycare, you're piecing things together. So it means when we're at work, we're fully locked in. We get things done. And we also bring this outside perspective that I think is really important, but that isn't part yet of the norm of academia itself. So it's really hard to change that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jackie, so we've been talking about this in a very, general manner. Now, you talked about it in the beginning, and in the book you mentioned it, and these stories need to resonate with different populations. Be it BIPOC, disabled, anyway, many. So university and graduate school is a very diverse universe. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that side of things, of maybe what at your university, for example, is working in helping these people feel safe bringing these questions, but also some, one narrative that, or a few stories or moments in narratives that you think really marked you when you interviewed the people, and that can inspire people watching or listening to go have these conversations, because and also to go read the book, but to be inspired by these narratives to find this safe space or this safe person to talk. So two facets: what's working from what you see and what's around you, and from the book, what are like key two to three key stories that you think are really, really inspiring and helpful.
There are so many. So sorry, that's not in the book, but to answer your question, I think it goes to community, or all comes back to community. So at the outset of this project, we could not have anticipated who would want to write, of course, like it's a difficult political climate, it has been for years, and who, especially graduate student parents, would want to publish on their experience, which might be unlike, a mainstream or more typical, there's no typical, but more typical graduate student experience from their lived perspective. And yet so many put themselves out there. So after the book came out, I have a colleague in biology, full professor, and she was so excited. And I just posted about the book on LinkedIn, and, I didn't broadcast it at my own institution too much. But I was surprised when she saw on LinkedIn, I posted about the book, and she immediately thought of one of her doctoral students who she bought a copy of the book for, because she identifies as a conservative Muslim mother. And in the collection, there's a story on that in particular. And that was the kind of, and it's a lovely retelling of someone's experience and really grappling with like these kind of opposing values. And what do you do with that in a space where things can feel unwelcome or untraditional? And she was so excited. She bought a copy and she said, "Can you sign the book for me so I can give it to my grad?" And I think there was, even though that's not the topic, there's community now around that. And hopefully, if nothing else, at my institution, when we do panels and programs and things to support graduate student parents, I don't have everyone's lived experience. All of our lived experiences are going to look really different. But just being able to talk about that openly is really validating, and you feel seen. So no one's going to know exactly what I went through, but the fact that someone else is going through something hard and we can acknowledge that is really powerful. So that's a good story. There's another, I really love the one that Jenna was just alluding to, Dr. Stephanie Graff, because she is an oncologist now, I believe, and my jaw was dropping at multiple points at that first read. I mean, there are little Easter eggs. There are horrific things that happen. There are exciting things. There's like little surprises, like out of office replies that are really motivating. Another one that comes from a dad actually is, I'm not going to say the word aloud because I don't want to disrespect anyone in your audience, but it's "Go to effing Disney World." And for Rutgers, we had to put it out for the press. And that one really lands, I think, with a lot of people, because it's this interesting conversation about a dad, and he's got a lot of guilt around exams, and his wife and in-laws want to go to Disney World, but he wants to pass his exams, and he's trying to be a good grad student and focus, and he doesn't want to let people down. And his advisor sits across the table and says, "Just go to effing Disney World," but says the actual word. And it's just like there's comedic relief at different points. And you're like, yeah, graduate school isn't everything. And so to the last question too, I was thinking as Jenna was answering, that we see in graduate school really brilliant people who are so smart and so like locked and loaded, hyper focused on this one very niche thing that, is going to be their area of study. That also means we can lose touch with reality, or like you need to go to Disney World, right? And make memories with your 3-year-old and your in-laws sometimes. And that's life. And I think it takes us out of the PhD or out of the master's program and gives us a really useful perspective on reality. So there are so many I love, but those are just a few that come to mind.
Yeah. And those are great. And I want to commend the diversity of stories in the book, I mentioned BIPOC. There's people who are like distant students who have, that are studying graduate school, not in person with a child. Anyway, it's really, you said inclusive right at the beginning of the interview, and that's really it's a through line, in all the book, just based on the diversity of stories that you share there, and it's amazing to to see, and I think it's important because, again, like we were saying, not all stories resonate with everyone, but with all that you have here, there's going to be a story that's going to help you who are listening now. It's in there for sure. Now, maybe taking a step back and going back to a more, a wider view of all of this. Thinking of the people I've known when I was in graduate school, thinking of my experience becoming a parent as a father, but after graduate school already, at my first job, and having weird experiences, even just trying to get paternal leave, which we can ask here in Canada. I think one of the issues that people deal with is fear, right? People who, like you were saying, see the door of the professor and wonder, should I broach this, or am I going to shoot myself in the foot? And the fear, I imagine, it can take different tones. It can be fear of, falling down off the horse and then not being able to pick up once, especially if you're the mother and if you're breastfeeding, etc. And there's going to be, and I'm thinking of STEM because that's what I'm used to, but you're not going to be able to do experiments for a little while, and then am I going to be able to pick up the speed and X months later? So there's that fear. There can also simply be fear of disappointing your supervisor, who you probably admire, or your mentor. Also, depending, fear of losing funding, or just having to quit for some reason, and a lot of this is based on the unknowns of not knowing how the person in front of you, but also the institution, will react to this. Especially, like Jenna, you were saying, you were the first one in your program, so you didn't know, and actually you did the right thing, which was to also gather information on your side. But dealing with this fear, and you've already, of course, mentioned some of it: getting community, finding safe people to converse with, safe spaces. But when people read your book, is one of the things you expect to tone down the fear? And of course, I think it is. But can you distill some common aspects to all these narratives that, if you share them to the audience now who are listening or watching, may already help them be a little bit less afraid of just talking about their plans of becoming parents with someone in their institution? Maybe it's not going to be, the first one is not going to be your supervisor, but how do we deal with the fear that blocks us from even having that first conversation?
Good question. I don't know that we necessarily are able to help with the fear itself. I think that more than that, we can help people feel supported in working through the fear and having the confidence that, quite frankly, the threats are real. These are not imagined. These are not perceived. They are very high stakes. And if you have the conversation with the wrong person, or your advisor really is against it, that has consequences. And so I think that was part of the other thing about the book, is that it's not a happy, go lucky book. It's real. And so one of my favorite chapters is actually about someone who decides that academia is not the right fit for her. And it's not because she's not smart enough or not good enough. It's because the circumstances of her life are such that really this isn't functional. And so she has to leave. And so her advice is that if a person gets to that point, leave and don't feel like you failed. You didn't fail. The system failed you. So I think it's about recognizing it and kind of validating that fear, and saying you're not alone in it. And I think also one takeaway from the book might be that you can do it. You decide what the it is. That might be academia, that might be traditional, it may not be, but you can do it, whatever it is. Think about what the it is, and then find ways to kind of to achieve that, even if the system is telling you otherwise.
Mm-hmm. and I think you're right that the stakes are there. These high stakes, and yeah, working through the fear, I think is like you said, the path to follow, because you need to be careful. Now, this makes me want to talk about something that comes at the end of the book, which is the Jenna's self-preservation toolkit.
Yeah.
Are these tools that help you move through the fear, go forward step by step through this fear to be able to get the answers that you need?
Yes. So, and that was part of the other thing too, was that, we can talk about ideas, and that's wonderful. And those are great starting points. But for some people, you just need a thing. Like, where do I start? How do I, especially as parents, we are all exhausted all of the time. And as graduate students, we're, exhausting our cognitive abilities in that way. So you get home and you're like, functionally, what do I do? And so these were the things that I had investigated and, tried to figure out what works for me. And I don't always do them all. Like, my husband and I went for a stupid mindfulness walk today because we know that going for that walk is good for both of us, but we don't always get to go do it. And so part of it is about those small things. And I as I say in the chapter, feel kind of vulnerable sharing that out. Like, who talks about what kind of dry shampoo they use? But also normalizing that that's part of the conversation too. Like, practically speaking, how do you survive? How do you do the things you have to do as a person, in addition to as a parent and a graduate student? So that was kind of funny. And Jackie and I went back and forth on that, just in terms of what it was. It's very unusual for a book to have that. But I wanted people to have that starting point. And again, to kind of normalize the conversation so they can talk about these different things. And because so much of the book is about conversation and asking questions, that this then gave them a set of tools to start that.
Amazing. So get the book and you'll get this toolkit. Now, Jackie, I have also at the end of the book, there's something that I believe, anyway, that comes probably from your experience. And we've been talking a lot, and I always focus a lot on graduate students, because there's this power balance there, that you depend on the institution, on the supervisor, to get this degree that then will move you forward. But these questions also apply to people who are past the degree and who are now trying either to get on the tenure track or who are already on tenure track. And there's a chapter on, it's actually called Powering Through an Academic Job Market as a Breastfeeding Mom. How does all of this, Jackie, apply to actually when you're trying to build your career as an academic, and maybe also you're getting signals that maybe you should wait, maybe first get your career and then think about building a family. What was your experience there, and maybe talk to us a little bit about this chapter?
So that after we were talking about our favorites, I thought of that one too, by Danny DeVasto, and Leave a Note, because it's this beautiful, like, cosmic serendipitous moment where she's in the airport and she's in the lactation pod and she sees all these notes of encouragement from working moms all around her. Oh, wow. And it just really resonated with me. Yeah. So when I was on the market, actually interviewing for my job here, and I've published a little bit about this experience in Ms. Magazine, I didn't know my rights. And so a lot of the book is we're kind of opening up conversation around knowing your rights, which is huge in addressing fear. But I didn't know my rights, and I knew some of them, but I was also worried about the stigma that might follow me. And in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have been as worried. But I remember I was so nervous, and I was still breastfeeding my son at that point. So I had to take a pump. But, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in the US, when we do a day or 2 day long campus visit, it's intense. I mean, you might get a break here or there. I had to ask some question about what private spaces were available to me without revealing a lot of information, because I was concerned about that. And I remember there was a harrowing moment where like halfway through the day, I finally got a 15-minute break. And so I brought like a manual hand pump to try and, relieve some stress that I was feeling. And it broke. it broke. And so at the end of this like 13-hour day, which I'd slept 2 hours the night before because I was so nervous, like just my body like physically was out of whack. It broke. And I was just like, well, the show goes on. And so I finished this 13-hour day, and then I got stuck in Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex traffic on the way home. And I was in traffic for like 2 hours. And I was just in the car crying and sobbing when I got home. And my husband looked at me like, oh, you are not okay. But then I saw my son. But those are the kind of stories, people talk about shadow CVs or shadow curriculum vitaes. And I've seen some good work around this where it's like, those are all the moments that don't make it onto the CV, right? Like those are the things where you really like earn your medal, you know what you're, and no one sees that. But if we have conversations about it, then we can better prepare those who come next in line with us. And now I know to ask any students who are parenting and on the market, you need to think about these things, to prepare them.
And now, one of the other question, and we're getting to the end of the interview, but the other question that I have, and because we've talked about a lot of, and you mentioned this with the person is in the breastfeeding pod and she sees all these messages, and even though she doesn't know these women, it's a community, right? The fact that you understand that you're not alone dealing with this helps you already take these steps forward to through the fear to feel that at least your question is not selfish, it's not irrelevant. It's not, I don't know, it's not, how can I say, anyway, you're entitled to having this question, and this community, the fact of having community is kind of the support that you have that can at least have you think and believe and wake up saying, I'm entitled to having this question in me and to finding an answer for it. Now, when you're a graduate student, often you come from either abroad or far away, and you don't know where to find these safe spaces or these safe people to ask these questions. In your experience, are there typically services that typically are offered at university where, if you feel that it's not safe in your close circle to broach the issue, are there like types of or names of offices that typically are the right ones to go to start finding your way through this question and finding what's out there in terms of regulations, etc.?
So in our syllabus, we have a policy statement that we are required to put in about legal rights of pregnant and parenting students, graduate, undergrad, and the other. And so hopefully there's something to that effect in everyone's syllabus that if you're in a class and you're not sure, you can consult with that. You can also look into like the Office of Civility or any student life offices and just wander into those places and someone will point you to the resource you need. On my campus, if someone were to do that, they would probably get pointed to one of two places, either our CARE office, and more universities have these kind of programs. CARE stands for Campus Alliance for Resource Education. And we talk about things like in the past, we've had C-Campus grants to fund childcare. We have a Bezos Academy that's opening up. We do emergency aid for parents who need it and maybe can't make ends meet. We have like free groceries every month. So someone would probably be pointed in that direction for resource education or, again, to know their rights. Or most universities here have like an Office of General Counsel or legal aid that you can go and have a consultation for free with someone who has a legal background and can advise you correctly. And then, of course, campus psychology and counseling centers can kind of walk you through your rights. And then for faculty, we usually have like a faculty ombudsperson so that you can talk with that person. And that person's also oftentimes available to graduate teaching assistants because they qualify as faculty at many institutions. And there's a potential resource.
Of course. That's amazing. Thank you, Jackie. On your side, Jenna, does it look the same?
I'd say I don't think I've heard of the number of resources Jackie just talked about.
That was a lot. That was amazing.
That was a lot.
We're a women's institution, so we
It's
think
true.
about this. Yeah.
No, I think that's wonderful. I want to actually add on something she talked about in terms of where graduate students qualify. And so that's the other really tricky thing is that, for example, I talked about the graduate student union. It was for teaching associates. So, assistants. So if you don't have a TA-ship, you don't necessarily get coverage there. And so that's something else is figuring out, because graduate students are in this very weird legal space where they're not full-time employees, but they're not really students. And so it also means that intentionally or otherwise, there often aren't actually benefits or coverage options for graduate students. So I would say, if there is a graduate student association, go there. Certainly if there's a union, go there. Women's centers often can at least, start that conversation when you're in the right place. And it's hard to know. We have a few chapters that talk about a really great institutional system that is set up and different departments that are really ready to think through this. But then there are other institutions where there is nothing. And when they try and build something, the institution really pushes back against that. But I would say, like, looking for student associations, looking for support centers, those are probably good starting points.
Amazing. Makes sense. Yeah, of course, university is a women's university, so it totally makes sense that it's a very rich offer that you have. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Jackie. And anyway, one thing that came to mind as you were talking, of course, is the more organic one of if you're on campus and you see someone with a child on a stroller or whatever, and you feel that's a graduate student or a student too, just talk to them and just organically try to understand and how they're dealing with it. That could be a safe a safe path to follow if it happens. Now, we're reaching the end of the interview, but there's one at the very beginning of the book. There's one term that really got me curious and that I think could be interesting to talk about. Let me know if you think it's interesting or not. But it's this concept of internarrative identity. And it's true that when, in your life, the before being a parent chapter and after being a parent, it is a change in identity, not within yourself, but towards society and towards the community around you. You kind of morph into something else. And then, of course, every action has a reaction. Society around you reacts a certain way. And then we've already talked about the fact that academia reacts different ways, depending on many things, to this idea that you have burgeoning in you that you want to become a parent. Would it be interesting in this last few minutes to talk about this concept of internarrative identity theory and how it applies to all we've been talking about during this interview? Either of you can start. I'll let you choose.
I love that every chapter. Go ahead. What were you going to say, Jenna?
You go ahead.
Go ahead, Jackie.
And that's why we put it first, because it's comical and it's truthful, and it kind of just cuts right to, I think, the marrow of who we are in many ways, grappling with these different identities. And narratives are important too. And again, that's why we like the advice narrative, is because there's a lot of power in storytelling, obviously, and a lot of connection that comes from that. But the stories we tell us ourselves are often dangerous and toxic, right? And so, a lot of people are familiar with Brene Brown's work and asking yourself that question of, what is the story I'm telling myself right now? And is it actually true? So that's a great one for just kind of watching someone examine internally different narratives and how you can then leverage, and this is a different chapter in the book called Leverage Your Assets, but like how you can leverage different aspects of your narrative and then sit with multiple, because especially I think like in scientific communication, or, what we do with rhetorical communication, which is related, we try to package, right? We're trying to distill down all these different parts of ourselves. Or if you're working on a thesis or a dissertation, you have to really home in on or narrow down to something very specific. And that does leave space for these different narratives, these different aspects of yourself, and how they can kind of all gel together. So I think that's at the heart of all these different stories, and kind of opens it up. It's almost like the bud and the blossom of like, okay, you're going to sit with all these different stories and they're all coming for you, but here's just one, and how one person grabs it. And then you see that as a theme throughout the chapters.
And Jenna, any reflections on this the idea of internarrative identity and dealing with this issue of becoming a parent in academia, but in graduate school too?
Yeah, I think the major takeaway from that chapter, but also in all of it, is that you don't have to choose. You don't have to just be a parent, when you're outside of the classroom, and you don't have to leave parenting outside when you come into the classroom. And that all these things are part of us all the time. And so kind of finding a way forward, which is sometimes uncomfortable. There's sometimes friction there, either from ourselves or from people outside of us. But knowing that's okay, that we are all of those people all the time, and we get to choose kind of the narrative, and we should feel empowered to really move forward with the narrative we want, not just the one we're kind of told we're supposed to have.
Amazing. I have a last question for both of you, but before that, can you please share where people who are watching or listening can reach out to you, maybe share their story with you after listening to our conversation, or ask for some more inspiration from you? Where is it that they can find about both of you, but then also the book? If you can share all of that, this information will also be in the show notes of the episode, of course.
For the book, if you go to Rutgers University Press and type in parenting while PhDing, you'll find the book there, and it'll be linked. But that's where you can find the book. And if you scroll down in the lower left-hand corner, there's oftentimes a discount code there, so look for that. So that's where you can learn about the book. And then for us in particular, I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I'm not an everyday person, but I love connecting with our contributors and people who reach out because they enjoyed reading the book and want to talk more about parenting in academia. You can also find me at Dr. Jackie Writes, which is my more public handle. I used to have Jackie Hoermann-Elliott on everything, but I'm trying to kind of put my private life over here and my public work. So at Dr. Jackie Writes, LinkedIn, that's where you can find me.
Perfect. Jenna?
I'm not very active on anything, as Jackie knows. I am on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place to find me. It has been wonderful, actually, even not being active, sharing about the book and the wide response that we receive from people, inside and adjacent to our networks. And then I'm occasionally on Twitter at WriteJMA. But also you can email me, at Brown. If you Google me, you can find me. I'm very interested in having the conversation. I am just, one of the balls I needed to drop was being on social media.
Perfect. Amazing. Thank you. Now for my last question. So in life, and this applies to wanting to become a parent, but to other things too, even just, getting into a new job with a new employer. But in this case, academia, we bring ourselves with the choices we make into environments that have very strong narratives that are echoing in these environments. Academia is one, it's very large, we could say very arcane. It's more modernizing, and clearly, Jackie, your institution is a great example of new and great ways to do things to include people and women here specifically in academia. But you can feel small with your small single person narrative in a place that has this big aura, and that and where you may even hear, like you have heard and like you have shared from other narratives, you can hear from these walls messages that, if you make this choice of becoming a parent, you're not serious enough about being an academic. And here is a book full. Well, there's your two narratives first, and that already show that it is totally not incompatible. And then you have the book with all these narratives of people who share how they navigated it. And I would love just at the end of this great conversation, I really appreciated all you had to share. To maybe for someone who's out there feeling really small in that sense that I was saying, if you had a few words of encouragement and of inspiration for them to understand that no, if maybe even if they're hearing from the university walls, like between brackets, that trying to become a parent while they are in graduate school or while they are starting, trying to get on the tenure track is not serious, and it makes them not great candidates for whatever their academic goal is, that they can they can not discount it completely, but that they can feel that their narrative is also important, and that there are many people out there who have done it. And anyway, a word of inspiration to not just feel like, okay, I'm here now, and even though this is something I really want to do, I just need to follow the rules of this institution, and then once I'm done, I'll follow my path, which I think is maybe a kind of a sad, but also not very good path to follow, let's say. A word of inspiration for them.
A quick story that goes with mine. I'll say, I think the word of inspiration in hearing that, and I really appreciate the point you make in that, because I think it's under-recognized. Like, people feel like they come in academia and they've got to be these rock stars, and you can have this happy, fulfilling life and career in other parts of academia, outside of academia. Like, you don't have to be the biggest name in your field. And in fact, you might not want to be, So I think do what you love and the work will follow. Right? Like the good work, the jobs, like really lean in and love it. And I think that applies in all facets, whether it's looking for the job or your area of focus and specialization, or even just like service and impact that you want to have on your graduate students. This book is actually like a little bit outside, I think, both of our research areas, but we had so much passion around it. And then another example to buoy any spirits of anybody in graduate school who feels like they're struggling with policy and things like that. When I was in graduate school, there was no graduate health insurance for PhD, thesis students, anything like that. And my husband, being a public school educator in Texas, I mean, we could not have afforded to have a baby on this health insurance. And so for several years, I just watched and I asked questions whenever I had like an audience with like our dean or department chairs or like associate vice provost I got to know through different graduate level work or graduate assistant work. And I kept asking, I was like, why don't we? Because when I was at Iowa State University, we did. And why don't we have it? This is pretty common. A lot of Big 12 institutions. Are we the only Big 12 institution that doesn't have health insurance for graduate students? And then I slowly kind of found my way onto the Graduate Student Senate and kept asking those questions. And in my 4th out of 5 years of graduate study at Texas Christian University, I served as president, and I worked really hard to get insurance, health insurance for graduate students. And then in my 5th year, I had my baby on that insurance, and it covered so much. So that's my story of like, if a little old me can do it, you can do it too. You got to find what you love. And the work will follow, and just like paying attention and knowing who to ask and being in the room, that's all huge. But find what you're passionate about. And for me, that was that question when I was in graduate school, and now it's supporting parenting and PhD students. So do what you love, and the work will find you. It'll follow, and it'll be good.
Amazing, Jack. Thank you. Jenna?
Yeah, I agree with that. I also want to say that like Jackie is a rock star unto herself, so you also don't have to feel like you have to go and like join the Senate and everything else. I think actually just being there changes the institution, even if you just show up. Because something else that I think connects to what Jackie just said, a lot of people just aren't paying attention. They don't realize it. I feel like a lot of these systems and what can feel like neglect or even, a barrier, people just haven't thought about it. These institutions are archaic in many ways. And so the habits we have of how we move through the space and what gets covered and what doesn't, a lot of times nobody's thought about it. It's just what happened before. So even if you're just in the space and you're asking questions, it means they have to think about it. And a lot of times people want to help. They don't realize there's a problem. And so, or they don't realize there's a gap. They just haven't thought about it. And in a lot of cases at a university, it's still very much, men who are fully tenured in positions of power. And sometimes they haven't thought about this. And so, you can have different conversations. So I would say just being there makes a difference. I would also say that remember that despite what it feels like when you're in graduate school, the world does not revolve around graduate school and academia, even though that's what it can feel like when you're in it. There is so much more. Like Jackie said, you get to have a life outside. And the final point I think I would make is this is your life. This is your actual whole life. And so if you're in an institution that doesn't allow you to have that life, heartbreaking as that might be, maybe the choice is actually to go somewhere else. And that, our dreams change as we get older and values and everything else. But you don't have to stick with it if it's breaking you. And if it's an institution that really won't let you be yourself and the institution won't evolve with you, then go somewhere else with pride that you are still fulfilling your purpose and making a difference.
Yeah. No, it's sure. And maybe just to add one thing today, it's easy to find, groups, forums online. If around you, there's no one you feel that you can talk to, you may find the inspiration of, if you've decided, okay, this is not the place for me, where do I go? You may find online people, like-minded people and people going through the same things who may already be at an institution where things are moving, like the women's university where Jackie is, for example. So yeah, sometimes community can be close circle, but it can also be like we said, in a breastfeeding pod at the airport through messages that were left there, or online in forums, which now it's so easy to access. So Jenna, Jackie, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation, and I really recommend anyone questioning themselves about this to go get the book, read the book. You'll see that there's one story in there, one narrative that will resonate with you for sure because of the sheer diversity of narratives in there. And once you have read, heard, I don't know if there's an audiobook or if there will be, but once you've heard a story of someone who went through, who resembles you somehow, or who you identify with, and who had a same problem that you're going through, and they share how they did it, it will help you and it will inspire you. Maybe not the whole story, but elements of it will inspire you to move forward. And I think it's a great thing you've done of putting this together. I think it's important that this conversation echoes more and more, and I'm glad to be one of these echoes on this great universe of podcasts out there. But at least in these academic ones, to be able to have this conversation with the both of you, it's I'm really, really grateful. Thank you so much for having been here today.
Thank you,
Thank
David,
you
for making this conversation possible and helping us rewrite the narrative.